Welcome back to Investing Talk Podcast. Today, we're going to be examining Hess Corporation, ticker symbol HES. And we're doing this based on a collection of recent analyses that you were kind enough to share with us. As always, we're hoping to really help you understand what are the key factors influencing this company's standing, what's its potential future, all that good stuff.
Right.
Our mission, if you will, is to really unpack what's most important for you to know right now.
Okay, so let's just jump right in. The current stock price for Hess Corporation is consistently reported as $150.45 across the board.
Okay.
We're also seeing a recent positive movement. One source indicates a 24-hour increase of 1.57%, while another shows 2.93%.
Oh.
This slight difference likely reflects the specific time the data was captured, but the overall short-term trend is clearly upward.
Okay, so we're looking at a company whose stock price is up a little bit recently, and it seems like one of the really big things that's maybe driving that is this agreement for Chevron to acquire Hess. That happened back in October of 2023.
Absolutely. That's a dominant factor in this whole conversation. We have to understand that this potential acquisition by Chevron is almost certainly influencing what we're seeing. With the recent price activity,
Right.
Investors are kind of reacting to the implications of this merger, which can create both opportunities and uncertainties.
So we don't know exactly how this is all going to shake out, but we know it's a big deal. Now, one of your sources touches on technical analysis, and it specifically mentions these things called moving averages, right? Mm-hmm. And it says that, if a price is above the 50-day moving average, that suggests maybe like a short-term bullish or positive view. And then if it's above the 200-day moving average, then that would be more of a long-term bullish view. Now, it's a bit frustrating because we don't have those specific values for those averages.
In the materials that you gave us, so I want to ask you a hypothetical. If we did have those values and say the price of Hess was below the 50-day, but above the 200-day, what would that kind of suggest to you as like a very initial snapshot?
That's a good question. In that scenario, it might suggest a short-term downward pressure, but a longer-term positive trend. So in other words, it would indicate that while recent price action hasn't been as strong, the overall trajectory over a longer period is still upward. So you see how these different indicators represent different time frames for investors.
I do.
Now, the source also mentions the Relative Strength Index, or RSI. Remember, an RSI above 70 typically signals that a stock might be overbought, and below 30 suggests it could be oversold. Okay? And of course, we don't have the current RSI for Hess in these documents. So we can't really use that right now to say, oh yeah, this uptrend is really strong. Or maybe it's running out of steam.
Right. And that lack of complete technical data is why that source is very cautious in its recommendation. It suggests either holding the stock or buying it, but only if the indicators are supportive.
Right.
So if the RSI is really high or if there are other signs that the upward trend is weakening, then selling or just holding on to what you have could be more prudent. So you really need more data to make a truly informed technical assessment.
Okay, so we got the technical stuff. Now let's move on to some other numbers. Your sources also provide some key financial ratios. So Hess has a price-to-earnings ratio, or PE, of 16.0 times. But this is higher than the sector average of 9.5 times.
Okay.
So what does that tell us?
So this higher PE ratio could mean that Hess is currently valued at a premium compared to its peers in the energy sector. So investors are essentially willing to pay more for Hess's earnings, which could be due to a number of factors, like the Chevron acquisition or certain growth prospects.
But it's interesting because we also see that analyst projections indicate only a 13.1% upside potential for Hess. And this is lower than the sector average of 25.2%.
Right.
So we've got this higher valuation, but maybe not as much projected growth.
Right. So we connect this to the bigger picture. While the market is valuing Hess at a premium, perhaps because of this Chevron deal, the projected growth doesn't fully justify that premium when you compare it to other companies in the sector. So this suggests that investors are really banking on that acquisition more than Hess's independent growth.
Okay, so the acquisition is a big wild card here. But beyond the acquisition and all these numbers that we've been talking about, your materials point to several other factors that could influence Hess's stock.
Of course, it's not just about the acquisition. Broader market dynamics are always at play. We have to consider things like global energy prices and policy shifts.
Right. And then, of course, there's always company-specific news, particularly regarding Hess's exploration and production activities, especially in regions like Guyana and the Bakken Shale.
So, If Hess announces some huge oil discovery in Guyana, or conversely, if they have some kind of operational problem in the Bakken, that could really move the stock price.
Absolutely. Any significant development, positive or negative, can act as a catalyst for stock movement.
Interesting.
Now, one source also mentions that Hess is really focused on upstream operations, especially since they exited their downstream businesses.
So remind me, what's the distinction between upstream and downstream in the energy world?
So upstream basically means finding and producing oil and gas, while downstream focuses more on refining and selling those products to consumers.
Okay, got it.
So by focusing solely on upstream, Hess could streamline its operations, concentrate its resources, and potentially improve its profitability.
So it's a bit of a gamble, but it could pay off if they're really good at what they do.
It could. Now, finally, your sources touch on the investment considerations. And as always, it comes down to this question of risk versus reward. So on the one hand, we have these potential benefits from Hess's operations, their growth prospects. But then on the other hand, we have these inherent risks of the energy market in general. And then, of course, this huge question mark of the Chevron acquisition.
Right, and you really hit the nail on the head. The energy sector is known for its volatility. It's influenced by everything from global events to economic cycles, and the pending acquisition just adds another layer of complexity to it all.
Right.
But, you know, on a slightly more positive note, one of your sources does highlight that Hess has this diverse portfolio of geographical operations.
Okay, so they're not just betting everything on one region.
Exactly. Diversification is key.
Yeah.
You know, having operations spread across different parts of the world can provide some resilience. It can potentially reduce the impact of localized economic or political issues.
Got it.
So that's definitely something to keep in mind.
All right, well, let's try to bring all this together now. So we're looking at Hess Corporation. Stock price has gone up recently. That seems to be largely driven by this pending acquisition by Chevron. The technical indicators are a little bit unclear based on what you gave us, but some of those financial metrics do suggest that the company is valued a bit higher than its peers, and they have some upside potential, but maybe not as much as some other companies in the sector.
That's a fair assessment.
We've also talked about their operational focus, their exposure to some really key energy regions, and of course the broader market dynamics are always something to keep in mind.
Precisely.
So I think this overview should give you a solid foundation to understand what the current analysis is saying about Hess Corporation.
And it highlights those interconnected factors at play, which are so crucial for investors to understand.
Absolutely. We definitely encourage you to continue your own assessment.
Yeah.
You use this information as a jumping off point, do some more research. And as always, if you have any questions or topics that you'd like us to explore in future discussions, please subscribe, like, and comment below.
We always appreciate your engagement.
But before we go, one final thought for you. I want you to think about how this potential integration of Hess into Chevron, if it actually does proceed, how might that reshape the energy sector in the long term?
That's a great question.
It's something that we didn't really dive into today,
Yeah.
but it's definitely something to ponder.
It is food for thought, for sure.
So thank you so much for joining us, and we'll see you next time.